welcome back for another episode of this season of Try This on Wisp Sports. I'm your host, Dr. Kirstin Lauritzen, and I have an exciting episode for you today. I finished the half Ironman Indian Wells in La Quinta, and it was a very, very interesting race. There were some really, really good things and some interesting things. So there's a couple of things that we're going to talk about today. First, I'll go over a race recap as far as how the race went and how all the bits and pieces went, is because we've been talking, I know, a bit about that as we've gone through this, the last several episodes. And then after, I'm going to talk a little bit more and again about heat stress and things like that, because part of it is my experience, which you'll hear about in a second. But then also I just keep seeing this over and over and over again at these races. And I really want to try to bring some awareness so that if you are an athlete that is out on the course and you are seeing signs of in an athlete that may be struggling, the more awareness that we bring to this, the better, so that we can try to keep people safe, because there's just so many races that I see people cramping, and then I see them falling down, and then I see them being carted off, in a stretcher. And I think the more awareness we bring to this, the better. So how did the race go? Yesterday was just a very, very interesting race day. I did get into the water much sooner than the rest of the crowd, so we did do that, and that was a very, very solid plan and approach and strategy to the day. I'm really glad that I did that. I was kind of seated in with the 35 to 40 minute range as far as the swimmers go, and that was a solid strategy. I did PR my swim, but I didn't quite get what I wanted. I've been swimming a 158 in the pool for 100 yards consistently, but yesterday I swam a 215 in open water, so I came out in the 43-minute range, which is still a PR for the 1.2 mile swim. I'm still happy with that, but I think there is a lot still of room for improvement, especially in my stroke and the speed of my swim. And then on top of that, just really working more on open water swimming. I think some work there would be really helpful for me. And so, so like the day as far as the swim went was still good. It just wasn't really what I wanted. I really wanted to get into the 30-minute or the 40, like I wanted to have like getting out of the water in 40 minutes. That was kind of my goal, is around that time. So I was a little disappointed when I came out of the water and saw 42 or 43, but I knew it was still a PR as far as any of my other halves that I've done. So I took that as a win, that the work that I had done was helping, but I'm not entirely sure what I messed up in that perspective. I think a bit of it was I still wasn't swimming as straight of a line as I needed to be. I'm going to do some more looking into that, because I had, like my GPS watch and all those things. So I'm going to look and see what may have gone kind of off and stray there. But so the PR on the swim was good. I rode a solid bike. I did, in my age group, I came in 12th out of 55 on the bike. And so I had a very, very, very solid bike this time. And the course was awkward. It was weird. I mean, it was good in some ways, but it was like the roads were so bumpy. I felt like I had just been bumped around, and just, it was really, really tough. On the bike, because the roads were just really, really rough and bumpy. And so on those tri bikes, it just, I had my tires down to 80 PSI, so I wasn't, bumping around as far as that goes, but like, it just still felt like I was being shaked like the whole time. And, that was really, really tough. But there was there was some benefit to the wind in some ways, because when we were biking out, I was riding it for an average speed of like 24 miles per hour. I was biking really solid out there, and I was making really, really, really good times. And I was like, oh my gosh, like I could potentially finish this like this continues to go the direction that it's going. And then we got to the turnaround, and it was just a solid solid. So we had basically had a tailwind, right? And so then we turned back around and then we had a solid headwind. So that made more sense why it was so fast to get out there. Because I'm like looking at my numbers on my bike and I'm like, whoa, like this is really fast. Like I didn't think I was, because I'm very consistent as an athlete. Like I know pretty much like where I am in training is probably, unless something goes kind of awry, I'm probably going to do that on race day. And anyway, so like, I was just like, wow, like this is incredible. Like, I wonder what's happening here. And then of course, it's a tailwind. So then we go back into the headwind and oh my gosh, like it was essentially just like a long, flat climb and push to get to the end. However, there was a piece on this course, which was really cool. And it was a race course, like a thermal racetrack, that some athletes really liked and others didn't. I personally really liked it because first off, it was smooth tarmac. So we weren't getting like jostled and bumped around on our bikes. So I really appreciated that. And it was so cool because you got out of the wind and there were a couple of corners that we raced around that you could literally just like all you could hear was your bike just humming as you're going through that course. And I was like, oh, this is amazing. I was really enjoying the memory of that. Like it was a really cool part of the race, but people didn't like it because there were so many turns that you had to slow down quite a bit. And it was really hard to get into a rhythm and to get into a good pace and speed. So there were some ups and downs as far as that part went, but I really appreciated it because I thought it was really cool. And then the rest of it was essentially just a push back to the transition to get onto the run. And yeah, so I rode a really, really, really solid bike time. And then I got out for the first part of the run. It was a 2-lap run. And it was all pretty much in the sun on a golf course, which was pretty, but it was extremely hilly. And then it got hot. And I could feel on the bike that it was starting to heat up quite a bit. And I could tell that I was getting warm, but I was like, it's early enough in the day. It should be fine. Well, I get out to the first loop of the run. And at about the 4-mile mark, I could tell that I was just really hot. And I think the hard part for the first part of it was that I emotionally and mentally started to break down a little bit because of all of the heat related issues I've had this year. I really didn't want that to be a thing for this race. And then of course I was afraid. Like I started recognizing that there was quite a bit of maybe a little bit of like a PTSD bit there. Like, it's kind of interesting how the brain and the body stores trauma, and it's hard to overcome it once it starts. Like, because, I kept thinking like, I just don't want to go through this again. I don't, should I just stop? Because like, I don't want this to get worse. And then there were, I think a lot of it was just fighting a lot of just thoughts. And I was kind of picturing them as, they're not demons, but they're just like these kind of thoughts that just don't work for you, that when it gets hard, and especially with fear and with that like feeling of like, well, I don't want this to be like, I don't want to get so bad that like I have, get close to heat exhaustion again, and so there were just so many feelings there and emotions that came up that I was fighting a lot of frustration, because what I wanted was to actually be able to run and perform the way that I had essentially on the bike and the swim, which is like, I've continued to get PRs and I've continued to improve in both of those spaces. But then by the time I get to the run, it's not that I'm not being able to perform there. It's that I'm literally just overheating so bad that I can't perform where I want to be and where I really should be. And that to me is extremely frustrating. So that was a lot of what I had to deal with with the first lap. And so by the time I got around, I see my husband at the turnaround, and I was just like, I'm so frustrated. Like, and he could tell, he was like, you're fine. Like, you're going to be fine. Keep going. It's going to be okay. But I remember saying to him, I was like, I don't want to keep doing this. Like, I don't want to keep doing this and keep, battling these symptoms. And that was a really kind of emotional time on that run. But then I turned it around. One of the things that we've been doing in my running practice is a balance between either a 9-minute run, 1-minute walk, or a 4-minute really solid run with a 1-minute walk. And so I decided that was what I was going to do for the second lap. Just enough time to make a good improvement on distance and to really run solid, but enough time also walking that it helped me to keep my heat down. And then it just gave me something to really focus on and like drive into. And so that's and I think that right there is what's really important. And also a very good learning experience as an athlete, that there's so many races where things aren't going to go right. And there's a lot of things that you can do in order to get your brain to overcome whatever it is that it's getting locked into. And that's a very, very critical thing for, I think, athletes to learn. And for me as well, I learned what I just, you need to focus. And you can't just tell yourself to focus. This is the thing, right? Like, you can't just tell yourself to stay focused and stay calm. You have to do something to get your brain out of that loop and focused into something else. So as I headed out for that second loop, I started focusing more on that particular, run 4 minutes, walk the last minute, for 5-minute sections. And that was enough to get my brain focused. And that pulled me out of that loop. And then I was able to finish that last 6.5 miles, which worked out really, it actually turned out to work really well. And, by that point, like, I was super flushed coming into the half point. And like my husband, Jason, was like, he could tell that I was really, I was hot, and frustrated. But by the time I headed back out for the second one, it was definitely warmer out there, but I was able to get my body cooled down, and I was able to take my brain off and my mind off of the first lap. And then I finished that second loop, and I finished the race. And so I get back to transition. I think it took me 6 hours and 20 minutes, which is not a PR. I finished faster in Salem. But I get back, and my coach was like, I'm pretty sure that was harder than Salem. It's like, it's hard for me to tell, because I feel like that was like, I definitely feel like the race was definitely harder than Salem, but I was really pushing to try to get a PR. I really wanted to finish in 5 hours, and that was the goal that I was really trying to hit. And, it was just a different race. It was a different race than that. I mean, and you know what? There were a lot of athletes out there that hit a lot of adversity. The male pro that came in second was hit by a car. Lionel Sanders got first, but the male that came in second, male pro, was hit by a car. And then the third one faced something else. But there were just a lot of just very interesting things that happened at this race, that there was just a lot of tough things, I think. So that was my race in a recap. I will talk about my nutrition and hydration a little bit, because I nailed it this time, and I'm very happy with what I did. I did. So before I had a hard time getting fuel into my stomach that morning. So I just pretty much had like a couple bites of toast with some nut butter on it. And then I had a whey protein drink. And that was just about what I could put into my body, because my stomach was a little bit nervous. And then getting on the bike, I pretty much did scratch gummies. And I did a fueling bottle that had 400 calories in it with 100 grams of carbs. And I know in the past, this is why it's really important to know and just to try a lot of different things, because typically what you don't really want to do is put like liquid hydration into your gut, because it can start to kind of promote dehydration faster. So I was kind of questioning whether that was going to be the right decision. But from a fueling standpoint, it really helped, because I never felt like I was low on fuel. In fact, I almost felt like getting off the bike, I was a little over fueled, but that was okay, because then going into that first part of the run, it was just easier for me to focus on hydration. And that turned out to work out pretty well. But there is a possibility, though, that the reason why I had some difficulty with the heat on that first part of the run is because of of doing a little bit of that liquid fuel. So one of the things that I'm going to keep working on and practicing is seeing if there's a balance there. But what was so nice about it was that I was getting so many calories in that I had enough energy in order to actually push and be able to do that. And I do think that translated into the end of the run, because I was still running fairly strong at the end. So there's definitely some things to kind of work out and play with there. So like if you are somebody that's trying to figure out what you should do versus like if you're using gels, or if you're using some type of whole food, or if you're wondering if like liquid hydration is a good thing or a bad thing, part of what you want to look at is how easy is it for you to get dehydrated. And then the next thing is you want to make sure that you're not further dehydrating yourself and pulling water into your gut. But all of my nutrition and my hydration was solid. I had to go to the bathroom once off of just to go, to pee, right before transition from the bike into the run. But that was all I had to do. And I didn't have any GI problems at all. So I really felt super solid on a lot of that. And I felt like I did keep up with my hydration really well. So I used, I also used, Scratch's, hydration powder in my first water bottle on the bike. And then I used Precision Hydration's 500 milligrams of sodium tablets, because they're just really easy to carry. And I felt like I kept up really well with my sodium there. I just got hot and they're on the run. And that's just my issue that I'm dealing with this year. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit, because you might be wondering, why are you still dealing with heat issues when it's been almost 6 months since Ironman Coeur d'Alene, and at least 4 since the Ironman, and in August with the other run that I did that I also dealt with heat. You might be wondering why I'm still dealing with that several months later, and there's a bunch of reasons for it, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. But so overall, I would say that the race in and of itself was a good race, in the sense that I learned a lot, which all of these learning lessons, I know all translate forward, because once you face them once, you have more confidence in yourself the next time, and you know that you can overcome, the next bit and the next piece of whatever it is that you face. And every time you face adversity and you overcome it, the next time you face that, you will be faster at making the right choices. And that's, I think, a bit of what I did do this time, is like, I knew what I needed to do in order to get my body cooled down. And then I actually ended up having a much better finish of the race, because I actually did that. I actually listened to my body, and I just dealt with it. So there's a lot of really good things that happened. It's always frustrating, though, to not necessarily feel like you accomplished what you really felt like you could, but that's not always how races go. So I would highly recommend, if you've been wondering if you wanted to do La Quinta, I thought this was a very, very interesting race. And I think I would probably do it again. But the run was definitely harder than either my coach or I expected. That's for sure. So, okay, let's talk about this main piece for today. We're going to take a short break, and then right after this, we're going to get into the main bit about thermoregulation issues, heat exhaustion, and heat stroke, and some of the signs and symptoms you want to look for, as well as some of the things that are going on internally that can have a really big impact as far as heat and how long it takes to recover and all of that bit. So stay with us right after this break. So there's a difference between heat exhaustion, heat stroke, and then just having thermoregulation issues. In Coeur d'Alene, I was borderline in and pretty much headed into heat exhaustion. Since then, I've more or less been dealing with thermoregulation issues. Heat stroke is where you basically have heat exhaustion and you don't do anything about it. And then a heat stroke is when you pass out. And then some happening is once you pass out from heat stroke, it can keep you in a coma for a while until the body decides it's safe enough for you to come out of that coma once the body's cooled down enough. And it can be hours before your body will wake you up out of that coma. So heat stroke is a much more serious issue that has basically, if you get to heat stroke, you've basically ignored all of the things and not done anything about it to get to that point, which is not ideal. So the issues, so here's basically the first signs, early signs of thermoregulation are nausea, dizziness, headache, rapid heart rate, or out of proportion fatigue, weakness, goosebumps, or chills. So those are the things that I've experienced ever since Coeur d'Alene. Is I get hot and I start to get nauseous. I start to get a headache. I get that dizziness where it literally feels like you're on a boat and you're kind of bobbing up and down. And basically like goosebumps or chills when you shouldn't be getting goosebumps or chills in the middle of a golf course and it's like 88 or 90 degrees out, right? Like you shouldn't be getting goosebumps in that scenario. But those are the symptoms that I experience. And I know that those signs are basically that my body is having an issue dealing with the heat. So instead of ignoring them and continuing to press on, I was doing everything I could to run a little bit, walk a little bit, and just trying to get my body to cool and to take some time. And then there's some other things that happen as far as like when you get close to when you get closer to heat stroke, essentially what happens is like you get those symptoms of thermoregulation issues, and then they start to get worse. More serious signs are things like confusion or disorientation. It's that like basically like an altered mental or cognitive state that is basically a criteria for heat stroke. And back in Coeur d'Alene, that's basically what my husband and my coach were kind of observing, was that when I came back from the bike and then that first lap on the run, I was having issues being able to actually get words out of my mouth. And that's a really, really not great place to be, for obvious reasons, because I mean, more serious injuries are definitely can come from that. But the issue though is that the thing that you want to look at, especially, and this is basically what they were doing, right, is like they were asking me questions. So as long as the athlete is able to be responsive and answering questions coherently, it's likely that they're okay. But if they're struggling to take simple questions or be able to answer, just very simple questions, it's time to take action on that. So those are some things that you can look at. Another telltale sign that heat stroke is imminent is the absence of sweat. So if you look at their skin and if they've stopped sweating, then And don't let prior sweat fool you. It's like if they don't have, if they're not currently sweating and they're really, really, really hot, that's another really big sign that there's a problem. So those are all red flags of things that if you're like out on the course and a person's sort of starting to talk about some of those things are things you really, really, really want to pay attention to. So basically, like what happens when you are exercising in the heat is your blood gets diverted to the surface of the skin in order to cool the body, right? So as we sweat, it cools down the body. The hotter the person gets, the more blood gets diverted, right, to the body's skin. And up to or more, as much as 25% of the body's blood can end up going to the skin instead of to the muscles and to the organs like the intestines, kidneys, and liver. And this is the thing that's so important to remember is that all of those exercising organs and muscles need that hydration. They need all of that water. And then remember, if you are then fueling with liquid hydration and gels that are potentially pulling more water into your gut, you're pulling that away from not only your cooling systems, but you're also pulling that into your gut. And that's what can cause GI distress in some people. But for the athletes that don't get GI distress, what you're essentially doing is you're pulling that water from your skin to help you cool. And then from some of those other muscles as well, like your organs as well, like your muscles and then the liver and the kidneys. And you're just working yourself faster into dehydration. So this is where, again, it's just so critical to understand how fueling impacts your GI tract, impacts the rest of your body, because it can lead to you getting, these signs and symptoms of heat, thermoregulation issues, and dealing with heat stress. One of the other things, though, is as they've been looking more into how the body responds to once you've had heat exhaustion in the past or heat stroke, any one of those, like basically where I was at in Coeur d'Alene, one of the things that they were focusing on as far as research goes for so long was how it impacts like the organs and how it impacts, like heat stress. And they were just looking at these like heat related systems. But they were completely ignoring some of the other things. And one of the things that they've now found, which we've all talked, we've talked about this on this podcast many, 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 many times, as far as how heat affects the GI tract. And you will have heard a lot more of that in the previous episode where I talk about some of the things that I was dealing with and have been dealing with in this last training block since August, of trying to get my body to yesterday. But that I was dealing with a lot of leaky gut related issues. And they've discovered that a lot of long-term damage can occur basically because of the GI tract lacking it, because what happens, right, is that when the body gets into exercise and it starts to not get enough protein, it starts to pull that from the GI tract lining because you don't really have a whole ton of stores of protein. So what it does is because that GI tract's lacking enough blood, it starts to get leaky. And then that causes that leaky gut. So then toxic related substances and things like that are excreted by the gut bacteria. They're called lipopolysaccharides. They seep into your bloodstream, and that results in inflammation that can then cause very serious damage to not only your joints, but also to your brain and to the liver and to the kidneys. And this is something that happens often, right? And we've talked about this as well. After a lot of these endurance races, you can actually get leaky gut and it sticks around for about a week or so, and then the body tends to heal it up. But if you get heat stress, it can cause more long-term damage than just the standard after racing type thing. And we've also talked about this as well. You can go back and listen to previous episodes where I talk about why it's important to get protein in during the races instead of just focusing on sugar, essentially, because it helps to mitigate a little bit of that leaky gut and it helps to delay that a little bit longer. And and actually a really interesting study that I thought was really this is what will explain why I'm still dealing with some heat issues, even though it's been several months afterwards. And I've been working on my gut, but I have a lot more work to do in order to heal that. And I've realized the damage that can really happen because of heat related issues. But there were some autopsy studies and an MRI, and they did a study on an MRI scan and some autopsies of people who had heat stroke. And they were looking at the brain, but they were also looking at a couple of other things. But they realized that there were certain areas of the brain that were not damaged that they thought were in the brain. One was that the hypothalamus wasn't damaged, which has a lot to do with like the control of a lot of systems. So you'll hear, like, especially with the hormone systems, like you'll hear Hpa Axis or HPT Axis. Basically what that stands for is the hypothalamus releases different types of hormones that goes to the pituitary, which then releases different types of hormones that then either goes to like the adrenals or to the thyroid. And so there's all these axes that happen. The hypothalamus is kind of this like main controlling center. And the reason why they were focusing on that a lot is because it has a lot to do with thermoregulation. But what they did find is that wasn't actually injured. What they actually found was that brain regions, including the cerebellum and then the cerebral cortex, is what was damaged and injured. And that's why people pass out when they get heat stroke. Now, I didn't get that bad. However, what they also looked at is the lasting damage to like the kidneys, the liver, and then the GI tract. And what they found was that people who had one study of distance runners who had heat strokes, and they did repeated liver biopsies over time, and they indicated that their livers were still recovering 4 months later. And then there was another study that was done by the Army's Research Institute for Environmental Medicine that found that 30 years after soldiers had heat stroke, they were at increased risk of death from liver failure and other organ damage. So the reason why I bring this up is because, first off, I know what I went through, and I know that I've been really working hard to heal my body so that this isn't something that carries with me for the rest of my life. But there are a lot of people at every single one of these Ironman races, either in the middle of the race or at the end of the race. I see people who are carted off, and they are basically like, they're not there. They're either being carted off maybe due to an injury, but a lot of them are just, they've either passed out or they've had some sort of other issue that they're just not, with it. And that is so frustrating to me, because that means that number one, they ignored the signs, or they didn't know the signs. And so then they didn't know what to look for, and they pushed it just way too hard, way too far. And or they've come in unprepared to that race. So these are things that can all be avoided. And I think I've shown and proven that if you know the signs and you know what to look for and you know what to do, you can overcome it, and you can actually finish the race instead of end the race without finishing and end the hospital. So let's try to avoid that, please. So there are a couple of things that I see that athletes really get wrong every single race. And there's 3 things. So number one is maintaining hydration. I think this is the hardest one for people, because they don't understand how much fuel or water, and also how much sodium and electrolytes they need in order to function per race, and especially in the heat. Number 2 is they either focus way too much on fueling, and then they lack or negate, and they don't focus on hydration enough, or they underfeed. So they underfuel. And then that leads to not necessarily heat issues, but that just leads to performance issues by the end. And the third one is managing pace appropriately. I know that a lot of athletes go out and they really, really, really push harder than they should based on their training. And then that ultimately is usually what leads to what we call bonking, which is where you hit that wall and you just can't go any further. That's in most athletes, but there are some who it's not a pace problem. They're just not fueling enough to support the pace that they should be hitting, that they do hit in their training. And that's just a slight tweak in whatever it is that you're using as far as a fuel source goes. So some of the things that you just really want to keep in mind, there's 4 things as far as how to prepare for going out to race in the heat and to train in the heat. But number 1, and this is one thing that we're going to fix, is dress for the environment. So you definitely want to make sure that you have a hat on, and then loose clothing is definitely nice, or having a kit, your shorts and your shirt or tank or whatever it is that you're wearing helps to contribute to cooling. My shirt, I think we've determined, is just a little bit too thick. It's great for cycling, but it's not good for once I get into the heat on the run. So we're going to change the shirt that I wear and try and get something that's a little bit more thin. So that's one thing we're going to do as far as an adjustment for my future races. Another one is to train safely in the heat. Like, I went into this and I've been in the sauna. I've been doing everything I can to try to get my ability to acclimatize to the heat. We've been really working on that, and I do think that helped at this race for sure. I also was on the other side of my period. So what that means is I was in the first phase of my period of my cycle, first phase of my whole entire cycle. And that's a good thing, because that means that I was actually able to sweat a little bit more, getting better rest, able to hit higher intensities. And I really do think that showed up this race. But I still dealt a little bit with some of the heat issues. And that's another, that's just another thing that I'll just have to keep working on. Another one is another really good tip is just to make sure that you make a good deal with yourself before going out to race. And I think this is something that is really important. So heat stroke in and of itself affects anyone and everyone, right? It doesn't matter whether you're a pro and your fitness level is just like amazing, or if you're an amateur and you're an age grouper and you know, it doesn't matter where you're at, but heat stroke can and will affect everyone if you don't pay attention, right? So even, I think the best thing to do is, like, if you're going to be racing in the heat, is to pay attention. Know that you're going to be getting hot, and what are the signs and symptoms, and manage accordingly. Because I know, I get it. It sucks when, like, you're not being able to run the pace that you want. I get it. But you know what sucks even more is not finishing, and also, you know, potentially being carted off in an ambulance. Like, that's the worst. So I think the best thing to do is to know that if you're going to be racing in the heat and you feel like some issues with thermoregulation are coming on, then you need to do the things that help you get cooled off, like take breaks in the shade, and really trying to make sure that you're getting a lot of electrolytes and you know, stuff in, so that you can try to keep those symptoms at bay. That is like the number one most critical thing here. And then the last thing is that with hydration, I think it's really important that you pay attention and start practicing it now. I mean, there's so many things with hydration that you can be doing to figure out whether or not you're hydrating enough. And a lot of that is, like, 80% of body temperature control during exercise is via sweat. It's the evaporation of sweat off of your skin that helps you be able to cool down. And the volume of fluid that's needed depends on a lot of different things. It depends on the environment. It depends on how large or small of a human you are. It depends on how you handle the effects of training in the heat, which is different per person. Like my coach handles heat super well. I don't. So there's a lot of things you need to there's very specific things there per person that need to be realized. But then also, how much heat do your muscles create when you exercise? All of those things are important. And we will lose a lot more water than you think, a lot more. So the best thing to do is to actually figure out in training, figuring out, a lot of people will do, like, if you weigh yourself before a training session and then you weigh yourself afterwards, however much in difference is how much water you lost. And then you can do the conversion rate to figure out how much you need to consume. And that is one good thing. You can try that and you can start with that and see what you figure out from there. But the other thing, and I'd say the most professional that you can get, is to go and get a sweat test. And they will literally put electrodes on you, and they'll figure out how much fluid you're losing and how much salt you need. And then they'll create a plan based off of that. So you can get a sweat test, a professional sweat test that you can go that far, and they'll give you a very specific test that and results that go along with that tell you how much water you lost and then how much sodium and things and electrolytes that you need in order to maintain that. But the other thing that you can do as well is you can get pH strips. You can measure specific gravity via urinalysis, tests that are really easy to do at home, and you can essentially biohack all of those things. That's a very effective way as well to figure out how much salt you need. But I think the thing is that a lot of athletes don't get into these race conditions, right, where they're racing for long hours in the heat. Their training just doesn't quite match up with that. And so they don't always know where to be able to, put all these pieces together. So then it kind of just turns into a mess on race day when it's way hotter than what they expected, and they just don't really know what they actually need to do. So I think that's one thing that can be very, very critical. And I would really highly suggest, if you know you're going to be potentially in a warm place, try to get this figured out before you get there. Okay, so I think that's everything that I really wanted to cover for today. I hope that you enjoyed this episode. Thank you so much for listening. Make sure to follow Wisp Sports on all social media channels, and make sure to share this episode with anyone you think may love it. You can also follow me at Dr. Kirstin on Facebook and Instagram, and also find me at drkirstin.com. If you'd like to reach us with any comments or questions about this episode, you can at info@wispsports.com. And you can always leave a direct message with us over on social media as well. Thank you so much for listening, and I will be back next week. Take care.